as you know, we are talking about, three categories of principles, or a set of 20 principles. These have been classified by Nation and McAllister into content and sequencing, and then format and presentation. And the third one is the monitoring and assessment. So we've got a list of 20 various principles. And now we're going to see their practical application, to what extent we can make the use of these principles for language teaching and learning, and overall for language curriculum design. Okay, so if you just could recall some of the previous discussions about 20 principles, you might realize that one of the important elements of these principles is just to serve as a sort of basis for language curriculum design. So we can gain certain insights from these principles, and we can use them to evaluate or assess the existing program, or even our own language teaching practice. So they can be used for teacher training or their professional development, right? And we've got certain insights from these principles, and these are like using these principles to help us, to help us critically analyze why and how we can use methods, why we use methods of language teaching, and what's their significance. So obviously, in the light of various principles, like, for example, content and sequencing, and format and presentation, and monitoring and assessment, so we could make some valuable judgments about whether to accept certain methods or reject them, or become somewhat principled language teacher. I mean, sort of eclectic teacher, right? And we've got, these could also be used as an input for designing a language course and setting up the specific goals. And then, the uses of these principles. Obviously, there are some practical usage. So we've got, we can use these principles to design language courses, and more specifically, we can make their use for planning our lessons. For example, the element of feedback is very important amongst these principles. So we can decide how well we can give feedback to our students, whether to give them formative or summative, or which should precede the later, right? And then we can use these principles, as like I said before, to evaluate not only the existing course but also our own language teaching. So we can become somewhat reflective professionals. And information integration, right? We can gain information from these principles about various concepts of language teaching. So it's up to us, as I've been retreating this point, like these principles are based on Nation and McAllister's personal viewpoint of language teaching. And we've got some other key authors in SLA, like Alice giving a list of some other principles. But these are a bit nice and efficient way to help us, know certain principles of language curriculum design and language curriculum language teaching, right? So, and one of the uses of these principles, we can become, reflective practitioner who could, sort of think our own pedagogy in the classroom. I mean, what goes well in the classroom and what doesn't go well in the classroom. So in the light of these principles, we can we can take them as a sort of reference points for our own teaching growth. So, of course, some activities for you guys. So, since we have, summed up our discussion about these principles of, content and sequencing, and format and presentation, monitoring and assessment. So, I would like you to just see, to think which you think are the most important principles for language teaching. For those of you, for example, who are already teaching or who intend to teach, so I would like you to see, to think, to just think about the usability of these principles for your own teaching practice. And secondly, afterwards, you can also think of, making decisions or judgment calls, how you can incorporate these principles for your own language teaching. So the whole idea is these principles are based on Nation and McAllister's personal perspective of language teaching. And there are certain key researchers who have put forth certain other principles of language curriculum. But it's up to us, and I personally believe that these principles offer a valuable source of information where we can make key decisions about, how to select materials for learners at basic, intermediate, or advanced levels.